Well, thank you everyone very much for joining me this morning. We've got a great topic to get your mind going for the day, something to chew on other than breakfast. My background actually and my focus at IDC is on data integration and integrity software market. So based on that, you might wonder, well, why is he talking about blockchain? I actually started looking at blockchain a couple of years ago, and I started to understand the impact, potential possibilities that this could have for data integrity. And then I started to look at it from the perspective of, well, what does this do to disciplines such as master data management? It actually turns it inside out. So I started to look at this and started to become involved in blockchain research at IDC. I'm part of a larger worldwide working group at IDC. We have someone who's in charge of looking at blockchain strategies. There are people in each one of the regions that are looking at blockchain, and I'm trying to focus on what's happening in the software world because I'm aligned with the software group for data integration. I'm now trying to figure out who's doing what in the software world in terms of blockchain technology. So today we're going to take a look at blockchain as a new foundation for digital trust in the digital transformation speed and scale, and we're going to focus on the enterprise. We're going to look at some use cases, and yes, it is actually starting to get real. We're starting to see some real production applications out there. We'll take a look at the spending guide that IDC created for blockchain technologies worldwide. We'll look at it at a worldwide level, we'll look at it at a Canadian level. And then we'll talk about what blockchain means to the enterprise and what means enterprise IT will need to integrate blockchain into their organization. I've only been an analyst for about 7 years. Most of my career has been spent building integration solutions for clients really around the world. I was an IT architect focused on application, data, and business integration. In 10 years with IBM, and prior to that, 10 years in various other roles. So integration, I think, is one of the many factors, one of the factors that we're going to have to look at when it comes to blockchain. Just like any new technology, integrating that into your organization is going to be critical. And I'll be honest, today I'm probably going to ask more questions than I'm going to have answers for. The good thing, though, is that we're actually starting to find some answers to these questions. But then I'll also help you ask the questions you need to ask to figure out if blockchain's right for your enterprise. So how we got here and where we're going. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on describing blockchain. I think there's some understanding of what it is. There's some technical details that I don't expect everyone to understand. But I did want to make a differentiation. Bitcoin is not blockchain. A lot of people equate those two, and it's fair that they equate those two. Bitcoin was the first application built on blockchain technology, and it's got a lot of really good positive aspects to it, including it's proven that we can insert trust into a world in which no one can be trusted. But it's also got a lot of negative connotations. If you've heard about some of the ways that this technology has been used, and some of the hacks that have happened over even a few weeks ago and a couple of years ago. And we'll talk a little bit about that. It's not the technology that's being hacked, it's something else that's being hacked. But it's really not a good candidate for the enterprise. At IDC, we're calling blockchain an operating environment with the potential for revolutionary effects on both digital natives and industry incumbents. Some call it a database, some call it a data store, some call it a file store. Some call it a ledger. Actually, we call it a ledger in some ways. We're calling it an operating environment, though, because really it is an operating environment that has data. It also has executing code, but it also works on a network. We'll talk about that. And there's a lot of interesting capabilities that it has. And the revolution really is the qualities of service that it delivers to organizations who are using the technology. It improves trust across organizational boundaries. It distributes accountability through consensus. Data provenance and immutability is a core capability, and it provides transparency. So this is a bit of a picture of what blockchain looks like in my mind. I'm not sure what it looks like in yours, but hopefully this can influence your thinking. It is a sequential and immutable record of data provenance. We start with a genesis block. It's data about an entity of value. As the value changes, new blocks are added to the chain to provide the new data about the value of that entity. Every new block that's added to the chain actually has a cryptographic hash of the block that was before it and the contents that are in that block itself. So as every block gets added to the chain, there's a cryptographic hash of every single block ahead of it. So as the chain gets longer, it's harder to break the chain because the hash in the most recent block represents contents of the entire chain. So what is a cryptographic hash? It's a fixed length alphanumeric string, and it's generated in combination with a digital key. So you have to have a digital key in order to use this technology. This really is the link in the chain. So the blocks are the blocks of data. The chain links are the hashes. Some people have talked about how quantum computing is going to break blockchain. Well, I also have to say that the technology that secures the links in the chain is the same technology that secures our internet banking, our shopping, our Interact e-transfers. So if quantum computing is going to break blockchain, it's going to break a lot of things. I think blockchain's only one of the very few things that we're really going to have to worry about. So the other part about blockchain that is really interesting is it works in a network. It's a peer-to-peer network. You become a part of a blockchain network, and every single node on that network has a complete copy of that blockchain, as I've illustrated here. In the network, as being part of a network, you participate in consensus in that network. So every time that data, there's a transaction proposed to change the value of that entity, at least 51% of the network have to say, yes, that's a correct change. We agree that that's possible. And then that data can be committed to the chain and that new block is created. Provides transparency. Everyone on the chain can see, everyone on the network can see everything on the chain. Well, with some exceptions, we'll talk about that. There's a couple of different types of networks. There's permissionless networks, which are the Bitcoins and the Ethereums. And then there's permissioned networks, which are things like Hyperledger, R3 Corda, Quorum. Quorum is the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance version of blockchain. The interesting thing about the network is because everything's visible and transparent, this adds to the ability to keep that chain safe, because if anyone on the chain were to try and change a single byte that represents the value of that entity, they would have to recalculate every single hash across the entire chain, and the rest of the network would be able to see them doing that. And so that's where we can potentially get in there and stop the hackers and stop the people that we don't want in our network. With the permission network and permissionless networks, this also has an impact on the way that consensus is achieved. In a permissionless network like Bitcoin, we have these things called proof of work, which are very elaborate mathematical, cryptographic, puzzle-solving things that have to be done. And this is where some of the transaction throughput and the performance of blockchain becomes a concern. In Bitcoin, a transaction can be committed or approved in about 9 to 10 minutes, which is pretty long for anyone who's ever done any transaction processing. So it's not going to be a good candidate for standing in a line to buy your groceries or for a credit card transaction. But if you think about some of the other transactions that it's playing in, where there's a number of different intermediaries that have to come together to approve that transaction, and it takes days, hours, weeks, doing it in 10 minutes is a huge significant improvement, because you take those intermediaries out of there with that proof of work mechanism. But in a permission network, you don't necessarily have to have the elaborate consensus mechanisms, because everyone is invited to be a part of the network, so everyone on the network is trusted. Everyone's accountable for consensus. So that consensus is, you don't need those elaborate capabilities. So this really turns distributed computing inside out. We have one system of record was the only way we thought we could maintain control over the data. So if that's the case, why do we need things like master data management and integration buses and the ability to reconcile data across multiple systems? Why do we worry about the quality of data? In a survey that I ran this time last year, 90% of the respondents indicated that data trust was important to them. I think the other 10% were likely just in denial. Data executives in that same survey ranked data trust as the third highest barrier to effectively using data in their organization. And it was third, 2, and 1 were budget and data quality. So blockchain gives us a distributed system of record. Every node has the most recent version of the data. It's distributed versus centralized. It's mutable versus questionable. It's validated with smart contracts, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it's agreed to through consensus by everyone on the network, which essentially should give us some higher quality. And transparency is key, so that we have that transparent audit trail and everyone can see what's happening on the network. So we'll talk a little bit here about the stack opportunity for blockchain. And this relates to the spending guide that we'll talk about next. So at the infrastructure level, we have the core technology. As a service seems to be the predominant delivery model for enterprise professional services. Sorry, for the enterprise, and then we've got professional services as well. Integration services and technology. And there's many more blockchains. I've got some listed up here. Ethereum, Hyperledger, Quorum, R3 Corda are some of the big ones, the ones that you hear about the most for the enterprise. But of course, there's the Bitcoin blockchain, but there's lots of other blockchains out there as well. Industry specific, there's different consensus mechanisms. I saw a chart on LinkedIn this morning. There's at least 14 or 15 different consensus mechanisms and algorithms out there that are available. There's a lot of the system integrator professional services groups are getting into this as well for the business and technology services. Looking at some of the horizontal use cases, distributed ledger technology is synonymous with blockchain, with enterprise blockchain. You hear that used, I'll use that today. Smart contracts, there's an opportunity to get better at doing smart contract development and governance. A smart contract is executable code on the chain. It's like a database trigger or a constraint, but it refers to the legitimacy of the transactions on the chain versus tied to the state of a database. And it's distributed with the data at the block level. It's not coupled to the database. I'm just going to go drink water here. Digital identity is also a horizontal application that's being looked at. The World Bank estimates 1.1 billion people on this planet cannot prove their identity to so much as open a bank account. So there's actually a lot of initiatives going on here. There's some at a country level. Estonia has a digital identity. India has a version of that. Kazakhstan has something like that. But there's actually a lot of work going on in Canada. There's a company called SecureKey. If any of you log into your bank accounts using, and then when you go to put your taxes in with CRA, you have the option to authenticate through a bank account, through a bank system, or use a CRA user ID and password. If you go the banking route, SecureKey is providing that solution. And the DIACC, the Digital Identity and Authentication Council of Canada, is also looking at this as a digital ID for Canada. There's some other initiatives going on around the world as well. But really, the value in blockchain is going to come in the vertical solutions. We need to understand where the value is. We need to understand the real business cases, as Bill talked about yesterday. And so some examples here. The DTCC, which is the intermediary in trade transaction settlement in the US, is actually replacing their mainframe system with a blockchain-based solution. I've seen prototypes for health and dental claims processing among multiple parties. I had a conversation this morning about how it could be great for the healthcare industry. And tracking shipments. If Bitcoin got made blockchain interesting for banking, supply chain has made blockchain very interesting for shipping companies. And in some ways, we're actually seeing blockchain gaining a lot of traction in what I would call greenfield applications, and that pun is partially intended. Because we're seeing places where there's not good solutions today. That's where the blockchain is coming in. That's where the value is starting to be seen. In the tracking of authenticity of luxury goods, Everledger, for example, has a diamond industry, a solution for tracking diamond industry. Walmart announced their food trust solution a few weeks ago. When they announced that, Walmart actually put out a mandate that every direct supplier of leafy greens produce needs to register their farms and the source of their produce from farm to store on the Walmart Food Trust blockchain by January 31st, 2019. Carrefour, which is a large distributor of food products around the world as well, they're saying by 2022 they're going to have it working with all of their branded products worldwide. IBM actually had a blockchain dinner on July 18th, 2018. It was put on, the chef was Aaron Sanchez. If you're a Food Network junkie like my wife and I, you appreciate who he is. This is a picture of the bitter green salad and bitter green strawberry salad that he made as a part of that dinner. Every single piece of food that was prepared for that dinner had been tracked on the IBM Food Trust blockchain, and it was all purchased from local merchants in the Chicago area. Could you run the video?
Food connects us in such a profound way. It's truly the language that we all speak. The importance of knowing where your food comes from, I think, can't be understated. We want transparency, accountability, and we want quality. What makes IBM Food Trust built on blockchain technology so amazing is that we're opening the door for a conversation with retailers, manufacturers, the farmer, the consumer. Those steps and assurances allow me as a chef to sleep well at night, knowing that people on the other end are doing the right thing. That is the future, and that's why we all need to participate.
The point here, I wasn't trying to give a commercial for IBM, although IBM is a sponsor, so. But the point here is that it is getting real. We are really starting to see blockchain solutions out there in the marketplace. And this is something that's going to hit the consumer. So IDC at the beginning of 2018 published a worldwide spending guide on blockchain technologies. And we'll go through the curve here, but I think in 2016, there's a little bit of spending happening on blockchain as far as how it can apply to the enterprise. The spending was around what? What is this technology? How would it potentially apply to my organization? And then, as part of that, we led to questions about why. So more money's being spent on proof of concepts, some prototypes and that sort of thing. Really trying to understand why I would use this. Where is the value in it? Then in 2017, I think a lot of people who went on vacation read a lot of books about blockchain, because when they came back from vacation, the inquiry calls changed from what and why to how do we use this technology. And so the spending on blockchain is really growing to a point where we're moving into an era now where we're seeing more prototypes, pilots, production implementations like we just saw. Had a conversation with Steve this morning. He's got something rolling out soon as well. To a point where by 2021 we had estimated a $10 billion worldwide spending on blockchain technologies. And this is not just technology, this is technology, services, software, hardware, the whole range. There will be another version coming out in January 2019 where we will estimate spending from 2018 to 2022. And I think we're going to be a little bit more conservative because I don't think we're seeing quite the take-up that maybe we thought we were going to get, just to caution you on that. So the worldwide spending guide, as I had mentioned before, also has geographic, technology, vertical, and use case splits. And more of that information is available from IDC if you want to talk to Lars. In Canada, it looks like this. This is the projections for Canada. Pretty steep growth curve there, but really I think that's because we're working off of a small base. Canada is a little more conservative than the rest of the world, which is kind of surprising because Canada is actually an innovation center for blockchain. Ethereum was created in Waterloo by Vitalik Buterin. Canadian Don Tapscott wrote the book on blockchain, The Blockchain Revolution. If you haven't read it and you're interested, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of that. With his son, he set up the Blockchain Research Institute in Toronto. SecureKey and DIACC, I mentioned earlier, are doing some early concepts and work on blockchain-based digital identity in Canada. And of course, there's also a significant mass of financial services, insurance, mining, natural resources in Canada, companies in Canada where blockchain could potentially be a real good application. Beside it being an innovation center, IDC Canada ran a survey back in June of this year, and we actually don't have very many organizations that are really looking at actually implementing or doing anything with it. I think the total there is about 21%. Compared to the US, it's about 40 points lower. The US did a survey at the same time last year, asked almost the same question. And so I asked Nigel actually, why do you think Canada's 40 points lower than the US? Well, smaller companies in Canada with fewer resources to invest perhaps. Canada is a bit of a branch plant economy where they don't need to know about blockchain and distributed ledger technology until corporate tells them they need to know about it. And new tech tends to be pushed out to major centers instead of being pulled in to those major centers, being pulled in by individual corporations. So IDC Canada actually has the breakdown of this by sector, industry, vertical, and company size, if you have interest in digging into the data a little bit further. So I am not a fan of Game of Thrones, but I always saw this picture with "winter is coming" as the phrase. And so I asked my brother-in-law, he is a fan of Game of Thrones. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, it's both a phrase of caution that a challenging time is coming and a phrase of advice to prepare for it. And winters in Game of Thrones can last for years, and they are incredibly harsh. So, be prepared. Blockchain is coming. Caution that there's a challenging time coming for blockchain, specifically for enterprise IT departments, and they need to prepare. There will be a lasting time of transition as we move from multiple internal ledgers and systems of record to one trusted, immutable version of the truth that's shared across multiple parties. And it will be very disruptive to IT environments. Even more so, though, I think in the processes, in the business of the business, and the applications when it comes to transaction control. So is blockchain ready for the enterprise? Well, I think the better question might be, is the enterprise ready for blockchain? Common misconception is that blockchain is about securing the data. Actually, the data on a blockchain isn't secure at all. The state of that data is secure and immutable because of those hashes and because of that consensus. But transparency in blockchain is key. Transparency is key to see what's happening. In fact, on the Bitcoin blockchain, you can open up any internet browser and you can go and see every single transaction. You can see how much Bitcoin was exchanged between two different parties. Anyone can do that. It's a permissionless system. That's why it's important, though, there's still a lot of security models that are being worked out. The authentication, authorization, access, all of those rules are still being worked out at the enterprise level. And if you're on a blockchain that's specific to your industry, there's a good chance your competitors are going to be on that same network, and you're prepared to share your data with your competitors. In a permission network, everyone's invited, everyone's trusted. What happens if one of those people becomes a bad actor? Who's accountable? Is it the entire community? Is it the entire consortium? Is it the entire network that's accountable for that? Well, theoretically, yes. So that's why transparency is key in order to be able to help catch those bad actors, to see what they're trying to do on the network. Of course, skills are still in demand. I had this conversation yesterday about skills in trying to do digital transformation. Skills in blockchain are even harder to find. That's why a lot of professional services firms are filling those gaps today. Standards have always plagued IT and integration. As I mentioned, I've worked in integration for years, and I actually did a project for a major Canadian airline about 15 years ago, tried to figure out what the best standard was to use as a canonical model in their enterprise service bus. I went out and I found 30 to 40 different industry standards that represented data that were related to processes that that organization executed on a daily basis. So how do you pick the right one? In blockchain, there's standards around block data format, content, consensus, security standards. All these things are necessary in order to get this to work. And all this is really needed for the integration in the enterprise. So let's take a closer look at what that looks like. So let's say there's a blockchain that, as an enterprise, we want to be a part of. So we have to connect to that blockchain. Connecting, technically, won't be difficult. Blockchain grew up in the open source community. APIs are table stakes. Technically, it's very easy to do. But when you think about this, the network and the smart contract change management and version control, who controls the reliability, availability, security of the network and of the smart contracts. There was actually an Ethereum hack a few years ago. It was the smart contract that was hacked. It wasn't the network that was hacked. They found a loophole in the business rules of the smart contract. And the other thing to consider here is that the smart contracts are the business rules of the network, not of the enterprise, and they will be different. Your business and IT processes integration with the blockchain, I think, will be more concerning. The atomicity between system of records and the blockchain is really the key thing to think about here. Think about the fact that every participant on the network has their own system of record and their own version of the truth, but the network only has one version of the truth. I think that integration middleware, of course that's my background, so I think it's going to be the solution here, is really going to help in the process, managing the process state and managing the different versions of the truth and trying to manage those transactions. But think about the transactions for a minute. If there's a system of record that has data about an entity of value, and there's the blockchain that has data about an entity of value, what happens when that value changes? Who's responsible for transaction control? If it's the system of record, does it have to wait for a consensus from the network before it can commit its transaction? A whole new kind of two-phase commit. If it's the blockchain, how does that change then get represented in the system of record correctly? And even though blockchain has been talked a lot about in terms of inter-enterprise, there's actually a lot of applications of it for intra-enterprise. I talked about the DTCC. The Australian SEC is also looking at implementing it internally for their organization. And Alliance Insurance is participating in the industry initiative for blockchain in the insurance industry, but it's also looking at how it can use it as a shared version of the truth across its own multiple business units and systems. So we do need answers, because blockchain gives us a lot of solutions to a lot of IT problems. Data provenance has long been a problem for analytics, decision-making, business operations management. Blockchain improves our trust in data. Not all copies of data are consistent in our current environments. Cloud is actually creating new silos of master data when you think about it. In blockchain, every node on the network has the most recent version of the truth. Reliability. If a node crashes, you reconnect to the network with a new node, you get the most recent version of the chain. Continue working. Blockchain potentially solves the elusive distributed transaction problem that we've dealt with in integration for years. The network can sense the validity of the transaction versus one system that tries to do the transaction and push it out to all the different systems. And for years, we've had multiple ledgers, which means we have multiple versions of the truth. Blockchain is one shared ledger, one version of the truth, immutable, trusted, and distributed. The good news is there's a lot of smart people working on these problems, and we're starting to get some answers. Integration middleware I talked about, I think, is a key here, decoupling that process control. I've spoken with IBM, TIBCO, Software AG, Microsoft, Hitachi Vantara, Informatica, Oracle. They're all working on this problem. TIBCO is actually working on a smart contract governance solution, development governance solution. We've seen part of what IBM is doing in the business space. SAP has a blockchain as a service solution that actually, in its first incarnation, was just a connector, adapter to their business applications. But announced at TechEd a few weeks ago, they're now supporting Hyperledger, multi-chain, and Quorum on the SAP cloud. And Oracle also has a blockchain as a service solution, and they see blockchain as a feature of future applications, not a product, but interestingly, they announced a product. We'll see where that goes. We've also seen demos at Dreamforce for it being used in a CRM context with Salesforce. Of course, there's also hundreds, maybe thousands of startups working to find their niche in the blockchain economy. One of them is in the room. And analytics. I think analytics are going to be very interesting for blockchain. It's not, as I said, it's not a database management system. There's no indices. It's very hard to search. Making queries slow, but analytics players are looking at the problem and looking at trying to solve this problem. I think, as I mentioned, analytics of the data on the blockchain will be interesting, but I think even more interesting will be the analytics of the metadata that's associated with the blockchain. The who, what, when, where, why, and how of consensus, transactions, distribution, smart contracts. I think that'll be very interesting and give us a lot of insight into how our businesses and how the network operates together. So is blockchain right for my enterprise or your enterprise? The first thing to ask is, does it align with my corporate strategies? Start thinking about where the real value is in it. Applications that need more trust and accountability of shared data or transactions, good place to start looking. Anywhere you have multi-parties involved in interactions and transactions, another good place to start looking. What are some of the strategies of those external parties? Does it align with their strategies? Does it align with how they get value? How are they going to contribute to this? As a part of that, what's your minimum viable ecosystem? And as I spoke about before, are you prepared to be on the same network as some of your competitors and potentially share your data with your competitors? You might need to do some alignment of blockchain technologies with your use cases. Hyperledger, multi-chain, Corda, Quorum, all have some different applications. R3 Corda is more focused on financial transactions. Hyperledger has a lot of work going on in supply chain, the track and trace that we saw with the Food Trust solution. Quorum is the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which has a little bit of a broader application. At the end of the day, though, I don't think you're going to be using one blockchain technology. I think you're going to have to support multiple blockchain technologies. Just, as I spoke about earlier, that airline had potentially multiple standards that they have to support from a data integration perspective. You're going to have to do the same thing with blockchain technologies. Think about your roadmaps. What kind of skills do you need? Are you going to do prototypes? Are you going to do pilots? Are you going to do internal, external? How are you going to do production support for this? What are some of those barriers to adoption? Nobody has any barriers to adoption in the solutions that they implement inside their organizations. You're going to have to start implementing this with people outside your organizations. It's going to be fun. Finally, show me the money. Where's the value? What's the business case? Bill talked about this yesterday. We're not talking about technology here. We're talking about the business value and the business case. And also be prepared to replace legacy investments that your organization has made in trying to improve the trust of your data, the quality of your data, the distribution and the reconciliation of your data. If we think about supply chain, there's been a lot of money, a lot of effort put into supply chain to make things more visible, to be able to see where things are, to be able to track them better. Blockchain potentially can replace all of that investment. So you've already asked your board for money to invest in this other solution. Now you're going to ask them for more to invest in a solution that's going to replace all that money that you already spent. So that's going to be a challenge. So in summary, some of the takeaways: remember, Bitcoin is not blockchain. Bitcoin is an application on top of blockchain. IDC believes that blockchain is an operating environment with tremendous opportunity to improve trust, potential for revolutionary impact. Enterprises will need new skills in technology, negotiation, risk, integration, and litigation, which we didn't talk about because that is a presentation all on its own. This is what it means and what means IT will need to integrate with blockchain. Thank you very much for your time and attention this morning.
Any questions for Stewart? Well, Stewart, sorry.
You mentioned that enterprises should prepare for multiple blockchains. Is there like a blockchain stack that you could identify, and then we could align all those blockchain technologies like Hyperledger or Corba to it, and then decide which one is best for a specific application?
Yeah, you can actually take a look. If IBM has a lot available, their blockchain as a service, it's built on the Hyperledger fabric. Hyperledger it's a consortium. It's open technology. In fact, anyone can join that consortium. Same with Ethereum and the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance. Microsoft tends to be aligning with Ethereum. IBM, of course, is aligned with Hyperledger. If you talk to Ripple and you talk to some of the banking financial institutions, they're kind of aligning with R3 Corda. The point here, I think, and the other thing I forgot to mention in the presentation is because of these consortiums out there, there are consortiums that are working on the technology. There are also consortiums that are working in the industries. Look for a consortium in your industry. Join them. Be a part of the solution. Be part of the smart people that are finding answers to those problems. That would be my recommendation to you. And as you're part of that consortium, you can learn from them. They can learn from you. You can understand which technology is best aligned to your organization. You can also go and do a lot of research on your own on the different technologies that are out there. But I think the consortiums are probably the best route for anyone who's really trying to get into this and really try to be a part of that ecosystem.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
What, if anything, is being done about the current limitation in terms of speed of blockchain? You know, the things I hear is that the number of events per second that it can handle are relatively low.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the Bitcoin is blockchain is not a good example. Even on Hyperledger, they are getting the transaction rates lower. In fact, IBM's done a bunch of benchmarking here, and they've actually been able to get it to a point where they're processing almost as fast as a credit card transaction processing system can process. But I'm not sure what the consensus algorithms are and how all of that is a part of it. And I'm not sure if that's something that's happening inside an organization or if that's something that's distributed. When you're talking about distributing those transactions across multiple parties and everyone has to be part of that consensus, you're getting multiple systems involved, and so you're going to take a hit on performance. But I think we have to come back and look at it from the perspective of let's look at those transactions that take hours or days or weeks to complete with all those intermediaries that need to get involved, and let's focus on those first, and eventually the transaction speeds will improve.
Thank you very much, Stewart. You're going to be around all day today?
Yep.
Please.
I also want to mention that for more information, that's it. Okay. IDC has established a worldwide blockchain working group, which I'm a part of. You can also keep track on what's going on IDC.com. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of materials on blockchain on IDC.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter. You can talk to Nigel and talk to Lars about what IDC Canada, sorry, my roots just came out there, but what IDC Canada is doing in terms of blockchain technologies. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stewart.